Before the two brothers were enemies, before betrayal, fear, exile, and forgiveness rewrote their lives, everything began with a struggle that no one else could see. A struggle that happened before either of them ever took a breath. Inside the womb, two children fought so fiercely that their mother wondered if something had gone terribly wrong. Imagine that for a moment. Two lives colliding before life even begins. No words. No memory. Only instinct. Only destiny already pulling them in opposite directions. And from that unseen battlefield emerged a question that still echoes through human history: can people escape the roles life assigns them, or are we forever chasing, or running from, who we were born to be? Jacob and Esau entered the world moments apart, but those moments would shape generations. Esau came first, strong, red, rugged, a hunter from the very start. Jacob followed, gripping his brother's heel, as if unwilling to let him go, as if refusing to accept second place. That single image feels almost symbolic, doesn't it? One brother rushing forward into the world, the other holding on, calculating, already thinking ahead. From day one, they were different. Not better or worse. Just different. And sometimes, difference is all it takes for conflict to grow. Their father favored Esau, the outdoorsman, the provider, the son who brought home wild game and smelled like the open fields. Their mother favored Jacob, the quiet thinker, the one who stayed close, who listened, who learned. And right there, in the space between love and favoritism, a fracture formed. Because when love is uneven, rivalry is almost inevitable. How many families still live this story today? How many siblings quietly carry wounds from being compared, overlooked, or misunderstood? One day, hunger changed everything. Esau returned from the fields exhausted, empty, driven by physical need. Jacob was cooking. A simple moment. A pot of stew. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, history turns on ordinary moments more often than we realize. Esau wanted food. Jacob wanted leverage. In a move that seems shocking even now, Jacob asked for his brother's birthright in exchange for a meal. The rights of the firstborn. Legacy. Authority. Future blessing. All traded for something temporary. Something warm and immediate. Here's the surprising part: Esau agreed. And people argue about that moment even today. Was Jacob cruel? Yes. Was Esau careless? Absolutely. But underneath it all is something deeply human. One brother believed the future could be negotiated. The other believed only the present mattered. One lived by hunger. The other by strategy. And in that exchange, resentment quietly took root, growing unseen, waiting for the right moment to explode. Years later, that moment came. Their father was old. His eyesight faded. Time was running out. The blessing of the firstborn, the spoken inheritance that shaped destiny, was about to be given. Esau was sent out to hunt. Jacob stayed behind. And with the help of his mother, deception entered the story. Disguises. Lies. A borrowed identity. Jacob stood before his blind father and claimed to be someone else. And with trembling words and stolen confidence, he received the blessing meant for his brother. Think about the weight of that moment. Not just a lie, but an identity theft at the deepest level. Jacob didn't just take something from Esau. He took who Esau was supposed to become. And when Esau returned and discovered the truth, something inside him shattered. His grief turned into rage. His tears turned into threats. And Jacob ran. Because guilt always runs faster than truth. Jacob fled into exile, leaving behind his family, his home, and the consequences of his actions. Alone on the road, sleeping on the ground, he dreamed of a ladder reaching from earth to heaven. Angels ascending and descending. A reminder that even in flight, even in fear, life was bigger than his mistakes. But dreams don't erase guilt. They only remind us that we carry it with us. Years passed. Jacob built a life. He worked. He struggled. He loved. He lost. He was deceived, just as he had once deceived. And there's something poetic about that, isn't there? Life has a way of holding mirrors up to us when we least expect it. The manipulator becomes the manipulated. The deceiver tastes deception. And slowly, unknowingly, Jacob began to change. Then came the moment he had spent decades avoiding. Esau was coming. 400 men. That detail alone sends chills down the spine. Jacob panicked. He divided his family. He sent gifts. He prepared for the worst. Because when unresolved conflict returns, it rarely knocks politely. It storms in with memories, fear, and everything we thought we had buried. The night before their meeting, Jacob found himself alone. And that's where the story takes its most mysterious turn. A stranger appeared. No name. No explanation. Just a struggle. They wrestled through the night. Strength against strength. Will against will. And as dawn approached, Jacob refused to let go. Not this time. Not again. He demanded a blessing. And he received not just a blessing, but a new name. Israel. One who struggles and prevails. But he walked away limping. Changed forever. And maybe that limp was the point. Because real transformation doesn't leave us untouched. It marks us. It humbles us. It reminds us of who we were and who we are becoming. Then came the moment of truth. Jacob approached Esau. No disguise. No lies. No borrowed identity. Just honesty, fear, and humility. And something unexpected happened. Esau ran. Not to attack. Not to punish. But to embrace. The brother Jacob feared for decades wrapped his arms around him. They wept. Two men shaped by rivalry, pain, and loss standing face to face, choosing reconciliation over revenge. That moment challenges everything we assume about human nature. Because forgiveness is never predictable. It never follows logic. It doesn't erase the past, but it releases the future. Esau didn't deny what happened. He didn't pretend the wound wasn't real. He simply chose not to let it define him anymore. Jacob bowed. Esau lifted him up. Power shifted. Pride dissolved. And in that embrace, the rivalry that began before birth finally ended. Here's what makes this story timeless. It isn't about ancient brothers. It's about us. It's about the grudges we hold, the people we avoid, the apologies we delay, and the identities we cling to even when they no longer serve us. It's about realizing that sometimes the person we fear most is the one who has already forgiven us. Jacob and Esau teach us that destiny is not fixed by birth order, mistakes, or even betrayal. It's shaped by what we choose to do when faced with the truth. One brother learned that grabbing the future doesn't guarantee fulfillment. The other learned that releasing the past brings freedom. And maybe the greatest surprise of all is this: the story doesn't end with who was right or wrong. It ends with reconciliation. With the possibility that even the deepest wounds can heal. That even decades of silence can be broken. That forgiveness, when chosen, is stronger than fate. So the question remains, and it's one only you can answer. Who is your Esau? And who are you still running from? Because the moment you turn back and face it might be the moment everything changes. The story doesn't truly end at the embrace, even though that's where most retellings stop, because forgiveness is not a moment, it's a direction. After the tears dried and the tension eased, something subtle but powerful happened. The brothers did not suddenly become inseparable best friends, and that detail matters more than people realize. They chose peace without pretending the past never existed. Esau offered to travel together. Jacob declined, gently, honestly, aware of his own limits and the fragility of trust rebuilt after decades of pain. This wasn't rejection. It was wisdom. Reconciliation does not always mean proximity, sometimes it simply means freedom from hatred. What's astonishing is how restraint defines Esau in the end. This is the same man once driven by appetite and impulse, the same brother who sold his birthright in a moment of hunger, now showing patience, generosity, and emotional strength. He had every cultural and moral excuse to take revenge. In that ancient world, honor demanded it. Blood feuds were expected. Yet Esau chose something rarer than justice, he chose mercy. And mercy, unlike revenge, multiplies rather than consumes. Jacob, on the other hand, walks forward changed but cautious. He is no longer the man who steals identities or manipulates outcomes at any cost. The limp he carries is more than physical, it's a reminder that transformation often comes through confrontation, not avoidance. The man who once grabbed heels now bows low. The man who once relied on clever words now leads with humility. Growth did not erase his past, it redeemed it. There's a detail people often overlook, and it's quietly profound. Jacob says something extraordinary when he meets Esau. He tells him that seeing Esau's face is like seeing the face of God. Think about that. After years of guilt, fear, and running, Jacob discovers that grace often appears in the form of the person we wronged. The divine doesn't always meet us in visions or dreams. Sometimes it meets us in reconciliation. This story has endured for thousands of years because it exposes an uncomfortable truth. Most conflicts don't start with hatred. They start with comparison, with favoritism, with feeling unseen. And they escalate not because people are evil, but because wounds are left unattended. Jacob and Esau are not villains or heroes. They are human, messy, reactive, growing, just like us. And here's where it becomes deeply personal for a modern audience. In a world obsessed with winning, being first, and proving superiority, Esau's final victory isn't dominance, it's peace. He doesn't regain the blessing. He doesn't reclaim the birthright. What he gains is something far more powerful: freedom from resentment. Jacob, meanwhile, learns that success achieved through manipulation always comes at a cost, but humility has the power to restore what ambition fractures. Even their separation after reconciliation speaks volumes. They part ways not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as men who no longer need to define themselves against each other. That may be the most mature ending possible. Not everyone you reconcile with stays in your life forever. Some people come back into your story only long enough to close a chapter properly. The legacy of this story doesn't lie in who was chosen or who was blessed. It lies in the idea that identity is not fixed by our worst decisions. Jacob was not forever a deceiver. Esau was not forever careless. Change was possible for both, but only when pride loosened its grip. Only when fear gave way to courage. Only when the past was faced instead of avoided. And perhaps that's the reason this ancient rivalry still resonates today. Because every generation has its Jacobs and Esau's. Siblings competing for approval. Friends drifting apart over misunderstandings. Families fractured by words spoken in anger and never taken back. And just like then, the question isn't who was right. The question is who is willing to break the cycle. If rivalry can turn into reconciliation here, it can happen anywhere. If decades of bitterness can dissolve in an embrace, then maybe forgiveness isn't naive, it's revolutionary. Maybe the bravest thing a person can do isn't winning, but letting go. So as this story fades, it leaves us with one final, haunting thought. Somewhere in your life, there may be a conflict waiting, not to destroy you, but to transform you. And the ending, just like Jacob and Esau discovered, depends not on the past you can't change, but on the choice you make when the moment finally arrives. The story of Jacob and Esau doesn't close its meaning in their lifetime, it opens a doorway that points forward, far beyond their generation, toward another brotherhood, another struggle, and ultimately toward Jesus. Because what we see unfolding between these two men is not just family history, it is a shadow, a preview, a quiet prophecy of something much larger that humanity would one day face. Jacob's life teaches us that transformation does not begin with perfection, but with encounter. He wrestles through the night, clings through pain, and walks away changed. And centuries later, Jesus would echo that same truth in a different way, not by wrestling God, but by inviting humanity to wrestle with itself. Jesus consistently stepped into broken relationships, divided hearts, and inherited rivalries, not to assign blame, but to offer restoration. Where Jacob once deceived to receive a blessing, Jesus would become the blessing, freely given to those who did not earn it. The rivalry between Jacob and Esau reveals a pattern that Jesus would later confront head-on: the human obsession with who is chosen, who is first, who deserves more. Esau was the firstborn. Jacob was the younger. Yet the story defied expectations. Jesus would later tell stories where the last are first, the overlooked are lifted, and the ones assumed to be outside are welcomed in. He spoke directly to the same hunger that drove Esau, the hunger for immediate satisfaction, warning that gaining the world is meaningless if the soul is lost. And then there is forgiveness. This is where the connection becomes unmistakable. Esau's embrace of Jacob is one of the earliest, clearest portraits of grace in action. No conditions. No revenge. No lecture. Just mercy. Jesus would later elevate this idea to something radical and uncomfortable, telling people to forgive not once, not twice, but endlessly. Where Esau ran to embrace his brother, Jesus would run toward humanity itself, arms open, absorbing betrayal, injustice, and cruelty without retaliating. Jacob feared judgment. Humanity feared judgment. And yet what waited was mercy. That pattern repeats itself with breathtaking consistency. The brothers' reconciliation foreshadows a greater reconciliation between God and humanity, where fear meets forgiveness instead of destruction. Even Jacob's limp after wrestling through the night reflects something deeply Christ-centered. Transformation always leaves a mark. Jesus did not erase suffering, he redeemed it. His resurrected body still carried scars. Not as wounds, but as testimonies. Proof that pain endured can become a source of healing for others. There's also something profound in this separation after reconciliation. Jacob and Esau part ways peacefully, each walking the path they were meant to walk. Jesus never forced people to follow him. He invited them. Love without freedom is control. Forgiveness without choice is meaningless. Both stories honor that truth. And perhaps the most powerful connection of all lies in identity. Jacob spent his life wrestling with who he was, a deceiver, a brother, a son, a survivor, until God renamed him. Jesus came to offer a new identity to everyone willing to receive it. Not defined by failure, rivalry, or past sin, but by grace. Where Jacob was renamed Israel, Jesus offers a new name, a new heart, and a new way of seeing both God and others. Jacob once said that seeing Esau's face was like seeing the face of God. In Jesus, that idea reaches its fullness. God steps into human form, not to condemn, but to reconcile. Not to escalate rivalry, but to end it. Not to demand repayment, but to offer peace. And this is why the story still matters. Because Jacob and Esau show us what humanity looks like without divine intervention, broken, divided, fearful, and Jesus shows us what becomes possible when grace enters the story. Rivalry can turn into redemption. Enemies can become brothers again. The past can lose its power. So when we listen to this ancient story through the lens of Jesus, we realize something extraordinary. Forgiveness is not weakness. Mercy is not loss. Reconciliation is not forgetting. It is choosing love when hate would be easier. It is choosing humility when pride feels safer. It is choosing life when resentment promises control. And maybe that's the final invitation hidden inside this story. If two brothers marked by betrayal could meet again and choose peace, and if Jesus could take that truth and offer it to the world, then the same possibility stands before us now. Not as a command, but as a choice. A choice that has the power to rewrite endings, heal generations, and turn even the deepest rivalries into testimonies of grace. When we bring this story into today's world, it suddenly feels less ancient and more personal. Jacob and Esau could just as easily be co-workers competing for recognition, siblings divided over inheritance, friends separated by a single misunderstanding, or families split by ego, politics, or pride. We live in a time where rivalry is rewarded, comparison is constant, and winning often matters more than peace. Social media amplifies it. Culture normalizes cutting people off. Silence replaces conversation. And forgiveness is often seen as weakness instead of strength. In today's world, many people are running just like Jacob, running from hard conversations, from unresolved guilt, from the fear of being rejected if the truth finally comes out. And many are living like Esau once did, carrying old wounds, replaying past wrongs, telling themselves they've moved on while anger quietly shapes their decisions. The distance between people keeps growing, not always because the hurt was unforgivable, but because pride refuses to take the first step. Jesus' message makes this ancient story urgently relevant now. In a world quick to cancel, he teaches restoration. In a culture obsessed with being right, he teaches humility. In a time where people choose sides instead of understanding hearts, he teaches love that listens. Forgiveness doesn't mean tolerating harm or ignoring justice, but it does mean refusing to let bitterness become your identity. Jacob and Esau remind us that healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's a message sent after years of silence. Sometimes it's choosing not to respond with anger. Sometimes it's letting go of the need to prove a point. And sometimes it's simply deciding that peace matters more than pride. Today's world is loud, divided, and restless. But stories like this whisper a different way forward. A way where growth is possible. Where grace interrupts cycles of pain. Where people are not defined by their worst moments, but by their willingness to change. And maybe that's why this story still speaks. Because deep down, beneath all the noise, people are still longing for the same things they always have: understanding, forgiveness, and a sense that broken relationships don't have to stay broken forever. If we can take even one lesson from Jacob, Esau, and the teachings of Jesus into our daily lives, it's this: the world doesn't change when everyone wins arguments, it changes when someone chooses mercy. And that choice, even today, still has the power to heal hearts, restore connections, and quietly make the world a better place. As this story gently comes to rest, it leaves us with something soft but powerful to carry forward. Jacob and Esau don't teach us that life will be fair, or that wounds won't happen, or that love always comes easy. They teach us something far more meaningful: that healing is possible, even after years of silence. That people can grow. That hearts can change. And that the most beautiful endings are often the ones no one expected. Their journey reminds us that mistakes do not have to be the final chapter. That being hurt does not mean being broken forever. That forgiveness is not about erasing the past, but about choosing what kind of future we want to live in. Through rivalry, fear, humility, and grace, we see a simple truth unfold: love has the power to soften even the hardest hearts, and time, when met with courage, can transform pain into wisdom. And maybe that's the quiet gift this story gives us. A reminder that we don't have to carry every burden alone. That reconciliation, whether with others or within ourselves, begins the moment we decide to stop running and start healing. Life may leave us with scars, just as Jacob walked away with a limp, but those scars can become signs of growth rather than symbols of defeat. So if this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of your own journey, your own struggles, your own hope, know that you are not alone. Stories like this exist to remind us that grace is real, that change is possible, and that no chapter is ever truly beyond redemption. If this message brought you peace, inspiration, or a moment of reflection, take a second to like this video. It helps this story reach someone who may need it right now. Share it with a friend, a family member, or anyone who could use a reminder that forgiveness still has power. And don't forget to subscribe, because this channel is a place for stories that heal, lessons that uplift, and faith-filled journeys that help us grow together. Thank you for spending these moments here. May you carry the wisdom of this story into your own life, may your heart stay open to learning, and may your days be guided by compassion, courage, and grace. Until the next story, stay hopeful, stay kind, and remember, no matter where you are in your journey, love always has the final word. Maybe the hardest part of this story isn't the betrayal. It isn't the rivalry. It isn't even the years of silence. Maybe the hardest part is realizing that forgiveness was possible all along. Jacob spent decades running, carrying guilt heavier than any burden. Esau spent years living with a wound that could have turned into hatred forever. And when they finally met, neither got back what was lost. What they gained was something greater, peace. And that's what Jesus came to show us. That forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, but it releases the future. That grace doesn't deny pain, it transforms it. That love doesn't wait for perfection, it moves first. Somewhere in your life, there may be a name you avoid, a memory you keep buried, or a conversation you postponed for years. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. And maybe, just maybe, the freedom you've been praying for is waiting on the other side of forgiveness. You don't have to forget. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt. You just have to decide that the pain won't control you anymore. Because when Jacob faced Esau, and when humanity faced Jesus, what we expected was judgment. But what we received was mercy. And if mercy could rewrite that story, it can rewrite yours too. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs healing. Like this video so it reaches the person who feels alone tonight. And subscribe, because stories like this remind us that no matter how broken things feel, grace always has the final word.